Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode. Hopefully, the audio is adjusted. If the background music is too loud, let me know in the chat section. I'll correct it. I found myself in a moment where I thought about something I've experienced, something I know how to respond to and handle. In my inner realms, I claim my own mastery of it, but in the outer realms, I'm technically a student till the end of time. And so I thought, considering the era of collective mindhood, I thought about pretty much teaching something I know, because in the future, people are going to have a relationship with information in way more advanced and complex ways than we are seeing in 2022. That means what we think is insanity in 2022 is hilarious compared to the types of insanity we can expect the species to behave in accordance in, let's say, the year 3033, What I am fascinated by is the human position. And the reason I am giving this podcast is because I want to see if it's possible to get 8 billion creatures on a rock spinning in the middle of nowhere to find a fascination with what is our most advanced performance before the end arrives. So this is something I'll speak more about at the end of the talk. What I'm trying to say is, poetically, the soul that remembered. It's a suggestion to the human being who accesses multiple inner realm realities, and sometimes there can be an information influx, okay? There can be an information overload. So pretty much in this episode, it's a really unique and specific episode where I am telling the viewers, all right, we are this biological organism, but there's this whole cognitive system aligned to the free will, and there's moments where as the human species has evolved and become conscious, and we have stepped from the jungle into the concrete jungle. We stepped out of the food chain, and now we're in a sort of psychological food chain where a person's intelligence is like dictating their outcome. So I have experienced moments of inner realm information influx. I have experienced moments where, poetically, I would say my mind has moved so fast that I couldn't be a shape or a person in front of it, But eventually what is the whole point of life? What's the point of having even spiritual experiences in life as a temporary biological creature, right? The whole point of our experiences is not for them to unconsciously loop, but rather consciousness stops ignoring what is part of its cycle of karma. There's this view of the fragmented psyche. That means there's certain psychologists who look at certain people and they're like, okay, this person has experienced such trauma that their psychology has shattered, has turned into fragments, And so it's as if the person has to psychologically be a different persona to give themselves a permission to do something. It's like rather all the permissions of reality coming through one persona, the person needs multiple personas to kind of express themselves. These are all, kind of like primitive compared to how the future generations will look at it. When it comes to information overload, mystically speaking, this is kind of like if when you suddenly stumble into the Akashic records. Okay, so I am tasking myself in this episode with explaining to viewers, and I'd appreciate anybody who's listening, maybe grab a notebook, a piece of paper, and a pen, and walk along me as I give this talk, So what I'm trying to do here in this episode is to say, okay, we have a human being. A human being is going through an event. We call this event life. So as this human being is going through an event called life, let's make this a horizontal line, it's also going through a vertical dimension, right? So it's not just like our bodies are existing in this world, it's that our minds are experiencing our bodies, and our minds can out of nowhere, based on just inner inspiration, move the body. What I came to realize is that something hilarious has happened to the human species, and let me tell you what it is. It's the hilarious situation of giving someone truth too soon. The internet, the information age, came too soon. And because it came too soon, till the end of time, we're going to have a nostalgia for the good old natural days, right? For me, my task is, I have often asked myself, okay man, why are you awake? Why do you wake up? Why do you keep logging into this conscious waking elemental state? What reasons do you have, right? There's times where I take a philosophical approach to what I perceive externally in front of my eyes, but there's times where it's hilarious. It's like when a philosopher gets depressed, it's like worlds are breaking behind his eyes, Anyways, it's very important I communicate how to, let's say, pilot your mind and attention in the space-time continuum when you have a subtler realm information overload. Okay, so there's reasons this happens, and then there's an unknown component to it which I could just poetically comment on. And so this is what I find is happening. Okay, so the best thing I could do is give examples of this information influx. Okay, there was a time where I was in conversation with someone, and midway through the conversation with that person, I started having thoughts, and my thoughts appeared to me as a sort of internal cinematic experience. So imagine like seeing 4 films simultaneously on the 4 different screens at the same time, right? Imagine 4 films, each with 50% opacity or something, like just overlaid upon one another, right? What I'm trying to say is that there's been moments in my mind where I've noticed my mind is doing something interdimensional, and it's up to my conscious personality to accompany it. So there's been moments where hilariously I have ejected out of my mind, so my persona has turned into the inner witness. Right, that's the whole point of trust. What I'm trying to say is the information comes really quickly, and I often wondered how, and I think in 2014-15 I figured it out, right? And pretty much this is the thing that's happening, Okay, the less the person has an opinion on themselves, the more the mind can be the whole world in the moment. This is at least a theory, you could say Mr. Within's theory on why people have psychological fragmentation. One answer is because they have forgotten a responsibility that is the birthright of their free will, right? That's one reason. There's psychological fragmentation because there has been a forgetfulness of that one needs to not just move oneself, one needs to align oneself. For me, the solution to psychological fragmentation, its remedy is like, imagine a businessman looking in front of a mirror and in some sense straightening his tie. Right? What does that mean? That means you're singularizing your presence, right? The nature of the mind in let's say a Mr. Withinian school of thought, the mind is so advanced that a human being's mind can make the whole moment feel like it's valueless. Your mind can make everything feel like it's individual. Your mind can make things just be dual. That means it's like what bipolarity is in psychology, is that it's like the most beginning form of psychological fragmentation. Right? It's as if the person has two types of psychologies and it's like they're fighting over the expression through the individual. Right? Now imagine somebody has, like what I'm trying to say is the mind is so advanced it can make everything mean nothing. It can mean the whole, it can turn the world into an individual value. It can turn it into a dualistic, endless play of forces, or it can choose to make it infinite. Right? That means imagine there was a psychologist, like a group of psychologists were talking, and one of them was like, yo guys, like they were talking at lunch, right? And one of the psychologists was like, yo guys, something next level happened, right? This client came, let's say it's a psychologist in a third world country where, client privacy privileges are valued differently. So let's say in a third world country, like a group of psychologists at lunch, one of them's like, yo, this patient came into my office and the patient was a mathematician, but the patient was psychotic, right? And the patient had in some sense like infinite, parallel, infinite psychologies, right? Parallel personalities, right? And imagine all the psychologists like, yo. Imagine all the psychologists are like, yo, that's next level, man. What happened? Tell us, right? And imagine the psychologists like, so I asked them, how do you perceive your personalities, and your personalities matter to you, right? Imagine in this hypothetical situation I'm just creating. And imagine the mathematician looks at the psychologist and says infinity plus one. It doesn't matter how many, different types of persona I have infinite personas. So I'm a personaless being, And imagine the psychologist is like, all right, man, have a cup of tea. Let me tell you what's really going on, and what I think the major reason for psychological, like maybe 80% of human psychological illness will disappear upon this view, that the person looks at this life, right, and wonders about why nature has given the human being a private imagination. Why has God given you a world behind your eyes that you can see? And when a person realizes this is the magnificence of, I would say, nature's geometry, right? That the reason mankind has inner realms is because a majority of the intensity that used to express as viciousness and violence needs to internally express, right? Imagine like a father who has a young daughter, and the young daughter breaks something important, right? And the father is just for a moment wants to get really angry, and then the father stops getting angry and goes and hugs the daughter. right? So what happened to the anger of the father there, right? Instead of externalizing, the anger internally externalized and disappeared. So the point of our minds having an inner realm is so that our psychological turbulence is kept in there. Okay? So the important thing about life, I have realized, it's kind of like Occam's razor. The simplest approach works, you know. You know. So there is a mystical angle to everything I'm saying here, but I'm going to just go with the information influx and kind of shape that, give more imagery to that. So I have envisioned that, you know, I've written about this in my novels and whatnot, but there may come a time in human history where instead of a person picking up their phone and checking the news, a person may be able to just sit down in nature, sit down in the forest, okay, or just touch a tree, or just sit somewhere and for a second tune in and feel as if something is going wrong somewhere. You know, there were such transcendentally, you know, such legendary beings in Tibetan Buddhism. There was this guy named Guru Padmasambhava, and this guy was so aware. It was as if like he had a GPS system before it was made, right? And there was a time where these kings were like at war and they needed like a wise sage's counsel, and Guru Padmasambhava like a year ago had started walking to that kingdom. You know what I mean? And he appears at the right time, you know. What I have realized is something hilarious, that our species gets bored, and in that boredom still has the desire to experience. You know, I have looked at all human beings to some degree as if like I have tried to be like that bird that flew from the branch of its own knowledge into the unknown sky and looked at everything again. And you know what I realized? I realized there is something within every person that wants to be seen by the world, and there's something that the world is waiting to see from everyone. Do you know? You know, this was years ago. I think it was 2016 or something. I was going for a walk and I got a vision of a metaphor of what am I doing with these Mr.Within talks, and I felt like I'm someone who's like holding open these two doors and I'm like waiting. Do you know? So this information overload, it depends on the nature of your own mind. It depends on the nature of your relationship with your mind. So there could be someone who, let's say, if you, how would I say this? Here, I'll give examples, then what to do, then, you know, the unknown factor. So what I'm talking about is that at some point we Okay, sorry about that, guys. Needed an intermission there. So, pretty much experiences, I need to give examples of moments where I've had information overload. I just want to make it clear that at some point, objects were more interesting to our species. And now we're living at a time where subjects are way more interesting to us. And the discrimination between objective truths and subjective truths, you know. So, I've had many times this happen where I've gone to bed. This was, it still happens sometimes. What happens is that I go to bed, right? I turn off the lights, I go under the blanket, you know, head on the pillow, and right when I'm about to sleep, suddenly this next level sentence appears in my mind. So when this happened at the beginning, I would just get up and turn on the lights, write the sentence down, go back to sleep. Then right before I fall asleep, another sentence would enter my mind. I would get up, write it down, to the point where I had to learn how to write in the dark so I wouldn't have to keep getting up and turning off the light, right? Writing in the dark in a notebook. And so it was something like this, that what really information influx or information overload is actually like a radio channel, where one channel it was like gentle violin music, the other radio channel like loud rock music. Do you know? So information overload is not just about seeing new dimensions, but how to assimilate or comprehend the content of a new world. Right, that's the thing about the nature of the mind. Many sages, many mystical traditions, even religious traditions, they all, to some degree, say like there's certain desires that are bad. Do you know? For example, in the religious tradition, desiring God is good, but desiring, for example, sex, you know, before marriage is bad. Ultimately, people, whatever belief you give them, they are still left with their desires. So information overload, there was a time where I gotta be honest and say the information overload was also due to a plant I had ingested, you know. This was during film school where I had strange friends, you know. Pretty much what's going on is that in meditation, let's say, as an example, a person sits down. That information overload I had due to the plant I had ingested was, in some sense, in my inner realms, there was so much information moving that I had to place the palm of my hand on my forehead. And that blocked like certain amount of the information, right? Because people don't realize when we say we imagine something, we're actually the watcher of our imagination. We're not our imagination, right? Like if I tell someone, think of a good version of yourself, bad version of yourself, those are imaginings, you know. So what is the solution of somebody who wants to move as a creature of attention in their inner realms, and what do they do if they suddenly hit a point where they're accessing too much information? The first thing I personally do when it comes to inner realm piloting is that it depends on how I feel. If I feel okay, I am myself in my inner realms. If I feel the inner realms are moving in a certain way where where my subjective self's involvement in that rhythm is unnecessary, I project myself as a geometric shape. So what I'm trying to say is that in front of our eyes, we are kind of, designed to be a biological human being. But behind our eyes, the idea of ourself doesn't necessarily have to be the biological body. The same acceptance of an idea could be through a geometrical shape. This is for another episode, really. But I'm someone claiming that I have I have remembered myself in Plato's world of forms before. So think of it this way, that just to make it simple, just to simplify my approach, I'm saying, what do we have to work with? And what we have to work with is a biological existential system, a biological objective system, and a physiological objective system, and a psychological subjective system. These are two domains, two states, or two spaces of to every person's moment of being, where they need to become responsible of. When young children, they say children have the craziest imagination, it's because children have not become responsible of being a constant idea of self all the time. Do you know? Because they haven't become responsible of being an individual, their selflessness allows them in any new environment they go to feel like a new person. But for a person who's, let's say, lived on this planet for 30 or 50 years, right, after some point you realize there is it's like, who are we kidding? We are all suited. We are all ideologically suited to survive. It's hilarious. So, what I'm trying to say is the information overload psychologically happens mainly because the person's attention is not in the outer realms, is in the inner realms. Okay. So, what is the solution? The solution is the person has a choice of how they want to move their attention. So for me, I stay in the psychological complexity. Like when my mind goes through an information influx, I stay with it, because for me it's like I feel like a surfer that's waiting for the next big wave. Do you know? To me it's fascinating why it's even happening, so I try to not touch it and try to observe it, right? But if the information is too much and the person personalizes the content of their mind, like I can imagine right now, like a bird, I could imagine a spaceship, I could imagine so many things. But if I imagine myself crying, you see, suddenly it has become personal. Do you see? So I'm saying, when I imagined the bird, no emotion, but when I imagined myself, emotion, emotion, emotion. Welcome everyone. Feel free to, give purpose to the comment section, chat section. So anyways, to keep going with this, I'm pretty much in this episode trying to give a sort of guidance to anybody on this planet who may suddenly experience an information overload in their inner realms. Now, based on who you are, your approach to handling the situation can be different. For me, information overload means something uncommon is happening, so I choose to get fascinated by it. Okay? But if somebody gets that information overload happens, there's too many lines of thought. Imagine you're like a film director and you're trying to direct the film, but there's like 5 films playing on 5 screens in front of you, and you don't know which one to look at, right? So in those moments you have a choice, and this is really what happens. We can, in front of our eyes, move our hands, move our legs, do backflips and parkour, but behind our eyes, let me tell you how it works. When it comes to imagination, behind our eyes, we are seated in a cinema chair. Okay, this is the most playful, secular way I could say it. So whoever you are right now, you could try this out. Just close your eyes and imagine a food you ate yesterday. Make sure it's yesterday, or imagine something you saw yesterday. Now your eyes are closed, you're in the present, but you are seeing something. So initially what we realize about the inner realms is that the inner realms is that part of life where we get to experience how the observer is static and the world moves in front of it. So some people say, I have thoughts, but that's not the case. What's really going on? I remember me and my cousins, when we were like, I think 11 years old or something, right? We would, my parents had this cottage in Iran, this place called Karaj. And me and my cousins and my brother, and we were all young, right? We would get a flashlight at night, like a group of us, and we would go by the river of the cottage, and it was completely pitch dark. And I remember turning on the flashlight and the light hitting the river, like everything's dark, and then the moment the light hits the river, you see all this movement in the silence, in the unconscious. It was so poetic. So similarly, what's going on is that, think of it this way, to make this in a secular friendly way, right? Even though there's a completely different mystical and even religious angle on this, right? But what it is that you first realize how something is working, and then you find an ability to control it. I'm saying that to handle the information overload, the information influx in the inner realms, the actual solution is to understand why it's happening, how it's happening, and why is something happening in the space of your awareness that you have not wondered about why it's there, right? For me, like, sometimes when it comes to the content of my mind, I'm like a neat freak. There's moments where I just, I walk into different spaces and my mind feels like maybe those old school radar scans, So it depends how everybody treats their own presence and the content of their mind. But what I'm trying to say is that you have to realize you are an unknown observer of whatever that is happening and being seen. Okay? The whole point of us being a human being is to experience free will. And a lot of people, when they're young, there are people, I think when a child is being like raised, the child is actually emotionally understanding reality. Okay, and I have this strange theory that people who go towards intellect too much, they have to fight for their hearts to not be sealed. Do you know? There's something about this world that I don't know why, but to me it feels like it's not designed per se to be comprehended like a machine, like we're gonna understand how the machine works, you know. But but more, it's like this world is here for there to be an opportunity for energy to notice itself, and based on how deeply and how incredibly it has noticed itself, it has vision and purpose. So you know, for me, everything I have come to learn from the nature of my own mind, from trying to tackling the mysteries of why consciousness is present in an existential scenario at all, right? To me, there's some things in this world that are so bizarre, and I'll tell you what's on the top of the list: existence. You know, for me, how from nothing, something, just the fact that there's geometry, like when you look at the body of a creature, right? It's not just like sunlight was necessary, it's that the creature had the geometry of having limbs. Am I the only human being on this planet completely freaked out how from the starting from the Big Bang there is geometry in the void? Do you understand? It's like it's like what life is us finding ourselves as actors in a film, and we're like, who the F directed this? Who's directing this? And us realizing the film is so huge that we can't fathom the director. When I say the soul that remembered, it's because in Vedic thought they didn't have all this like sensitivity of like, yo, you know, should I talk to a spirit, should I not talk to a spirit? It was like all of that shit was like, excuse me, all of that was nonsense. Theosophy became meaningless in the presence of truth. Sorry guys, these coughs are mine, or, you know, air pollution's getting out of control. Anyways, to continue. I think I've given enough examples. Pretty much any moment that it doesn't matter if your eyes are open or closed, but this is how you could check and see if you're experiencing an information influx. And this is the idea behind it, that if you do nothing, like if you sit still and silent in the moment and you do nothing, you think about nothing, no effort, just like Lao Tzu says, action to inaction, and you watch your mind, and if content and imagination is still appearing, that's an information influx, right? And I would say in those moments, like in any moment, like there's been moments in my life where I felt the divine presence, like an unknown divine presence in the moment. And what I tend to do is I become the most honest, simplest self that I am aware of, and I just remain present in the moment. Yeah, I was just reading the chat section, guys. It could be that others are experiencing this. I feel I was envisioning it more like give it 200 to 600, even, I don't know, give it 200 years from now. Not only will there be efforts and attempts to connect the human brain to a greater information platform, but it's just the nature of us as an animal. You know, what's going to happen in the future, we're like this natural biological container holding within itself like this potential energy. Now what's going to happen, it's like it's like this existential container, biological existential container is holding, let's say, experiential energy inside it. And the moment the energy goes beyond the container, what tends to happen is that there comes a desire from the soul to change the container. So it's as if imagine there's a Buddhist next level scientist in the future, and the Buddhist scientist is no way, you know, imagine a biological human being in one lifetime transferring their consciousness into a robotic body that's going to live thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So it would be as if, just like the Buddhists believed in reincarnation, which was happening lifetime to lifetime, the human person, the human consciousness transferring somehow into, let's say, a technological or mechanical human body, not human body, but robotic body. It's the same of like a reincarnation during the lifetime. Do you know, like a mini reincarnation? There's many ways that people can, you know, approach reality. I feel like you have to be a bit street smart about it. And what that means is you leave your conviction to the phenomena's utility, but you honor the presence of your own eyes. This is something that it was hilarious, but it took me a while to learn this. I was like, the moment I realized that I had decided, like a human being with my DNA, just like there's 8 billion of us, right? We all have different DNAs. It's like I realized a human being like me has never existed. And so who is here in this world to give value to this human being that has never existed before? So what I'm trying to say is that it's the responsibility of purpose, and it comes from the context of your belief. You know, when somebody says I'm just the body, then the context is the material world. If somebody says I am just the thought, the context is the mind, a mental world. But if somebody says, it's like, this is where we get to wondering about what is the context to the soul, and this is the brilliance of the idea. The soul is the contextless concept. The soul cannot have a context that can be interpreted as an object or subject. Let me say that in this. So what the soul is in some sense that which is aware of itself beyond an object and subject. So this is really why they say, like some scholars have called it the awareness of awareness. Usually when you become aware of this awareness and you realize you're the whole moment of being, you see, to me, what the issue with fragmented psychology is not that like every person's psychology is like perfect and polished and not fragmented at all. The issue is, what do we choose to display, right? So this is the thing where I think sometimes those with fragmented psychology don't realize you need to be responsible of your behavior in two worlds, not one. There's a world behind your eyes, your personal dimension, right? And then there's your impersonal dimension. And for the longest time I was like, yo, religion says the world was made for man, but man is here with everything else, you know. You know, the concept of the soul is one of the most fascinating ideas. Just the fact that that concept exists. So anyways, what I'm trying to say is that in front of your eyes, you're an object. Behind your eyes, if you try to remember who you were yesterday, you're a subject. Okay? So in front of your eyes, first person mover as an object. Behind your eyes, unknown viewer of inner subjects. And now the subjects, when I was young, it was just letters, but now my imagination is cinematic. I've reached a point where the moment I realized, I'm like, yo man, these words are trying to paint images. And every book I've ever read technically should have been a movie behind my eyes, you know. Do you see what I'm saying? The nature of our mind. Our mind is here because it can move the world faster than it can be moved. Like, I can imagine myself flying like towards the atmosphere, but in the outer realms I'm just some dude in a balcony chilling, you know. So what I'm trying to say pretty much is this information influx, it happens. If you're religious, it will happen to you as a test of desire or a test of faith. But if you're not religious, the way it occurs, I find personally, is that it's just going to be inconceivable at some point. So what does that mean? That means it's just like somebody holding, like trying to carry something heavier than they can carry. At some point they gotta let it go, right? Which is another way of saying they either have to tune down their outer realms or they gotta tune down their inner realms somehow, you know. I personally think of it this way. You know, personally, I'm not like this. Like, my attitude is like, sometimes I'm like, where are my thoughts? Like, it's like I feel just sight in the present moment. That's it. Like, you know. It's like they ask the person, are you depressed? The person's like, no, I'm not depressed. And then they're like, what's up then? The person's like, nothing, man. I just feel like I'm sight in space. Like, what can sight in space do? Mystically speaking, let's say, this is what I find happens. Pretty much it comes to this idea of self and world. For all mystics, this is universal to all beings, even in any sort of conscious vicinity or conscious domain. So what is the idea? The idea is that your attention, what consciousness is appears as the presence of an individual self in a world, and that world can be attributed and given the idea of collective. So we know that we are a self in a world, right? We don't consider ourselves the earth. Why? Because we're running on it. We're building streets on top of the earth. Like, we're not acting like the earth is enough for us. We're acting as if we want to do our own thing on the earth, right? So it's like different than earth motive. Right? So the psychology of consciousness starts as a self in a world. Now this is where, if the self in a world was a horizontal line, I would draw a vertical line here and bring the known and the unknown. And what do I mean by this? I mean that in life, pretty much, there is 4 modes that need to be, consciousness needs to attain mastery or cultivate, I don't know, familiarity with, okay? So what it is this. This is conscious in geometrical envisioning, right? It's like, what I'm trying to tell the viewers is that geometry is like one of the closest things after consciousness and intelligence that is like a gift from the gods, okay? So anyways, what happens? These 4 are very important, and I think they're very simple. They're not agenda or any ideological base. I'm just telling people a sort of geometrical shape, right? A design, a method. So my method is this personally, where I'm like, okay, there's a known self and there's a known world. The known self is biological. The known world is, let's say, elemental. I mean, everything's elemental, but let's say just this physical self and physical. So if I wonder what's my known self, it's my physical body. If I wonder what's the known world, it's this physical world. Now comes the other side of the coin, where I wonder about my unknown self, and I wonder about the unknown world. Just like self and world are a codependent duality, known and the unknown are codependent. So the moment there's a known self, there has to be an unknown self. So now I've kind of come to contentment with my known self and the known world, and I'm like, what next? Okay. Now when it has come to experiencing the unknown self and the unknown world, this is usually how it works. Either you're initiated by something unknown happening externally, or something unknown happening internally. Something happening unknown externally would be like, let's say, like Moses, speaking to the fire, at Mount Sinai. I don't know if I got the mountain correct, but right, that would be an external unknown event. Or imagine suddenly there's a glitch in the outer realms, or suddenly, like, if extraterrestrials land, or there's something like a miracle happens, right? Those are unknown initiations. Like, the unknown is behaving, if it is finding you in your outer realms. Even death is, believe it or not, messed up, but we're all headed for the unknown. The point is how strategically a species can use its intelligence to advance the greatness of its humanity. Anyways, what I'm trying to say, I guess, comes down to this, that we all have to meet the unknown. And something beyond information influx. If a person's like, oh no, what do I do with all this information? You should laugh and be grateful. Let me tell you why. Because in reality, life is unknown. This is something nobody can say because it can't be said. They ask the teacher, imagine in the future some person goes and makes a documentary and says to the teachers, hey teacher, how come we never told the students, we created language on a rock in the middle of nowhere? And the teacher was like, buddy, I need a job. So what I'm trying to tell people is be playful. Sometimes when I get overloaded or such a complex thought comes, like I can't, I don't know how to tell this to people, but silliness has saved my life, right? Like if there was ever an impulse in my mind to, like, be a dictator or be like some, you know, warlord figure or something, I was like, yo, like silliness saved me, right? My own silly, like I can't tell you this, but it's like some people have religious humility where they repent their sins. For me, I'm just like, yo, that's so silly, not the religious repentance, but just anything that happens. I think about both sides of the scenario. You see, those people who desire power, they're like chasing one side of the coin, so their karma becomes the other side, right? There's an incredible quote from this fictional character from this show called DBZ, where the character says, if I remember the quote correctly, he says something in the lines of power is a response to a need, not a desire, something like that. Right? That means power doesn't come because you want it to. You're like, I want power, yeah. It's not just because of that. It's because there is something needed to do with that power. Because if you think about existence, it's just energy, right? Like this building, this balcony I'm on is just energy. I'm an energetic being. But it's that energy is occupying position. Right? It's like as the universe cooled down, it's like the same energy, but it's appearing differently, right? And so what's really bizarre is that the human species has to come to a contentment and be like, oh my God, we're like ants, on the table of the United Nations, trying to wonder what human beings, think of like ants, right? What I'm trying to say is greater dimensions are usually occupied with greater dimensions. If anything from a greater dimension comes to a lesser dimension, there can be this view that it either got pushed or, in some sense, it had work to do. Yeah. Imagine they told this, this like, imagine Yogi who had meditated for like 30 years in the mountains, he suddenly decided to get a job, and he goes to the job interview, and the guy's like, tell me about your past experience. And the yogi's like, 1,000 years ago I was a king that ruled over nations. A couple thousand years ago I was the avatar of God on a different planet. It's like even before that I was the dreamless true original creator from the of original heaven, where we're all a simulation of, right? Imagine. And the job interviewer's like, all right, man, all right, we could use a new personality in this workplace, but you gotta wear a suit to work, not a robe and a cane. Can you imagine companies in the future, they're going to be like, hello, hey everybody, as a new member to our team, a Tibetan monk was just stepped out of his, next level samadhi. Anyways, guys, it's cold. I'm going to try to finish this. So the soul that remembered, what does that mean? That means at some point there is an awareness, okay, to how what is happening here is watching an object and subject happen. So the observer will identify as not an object and subject. So we are not ourself, we are the watcher of how ourself has been journeying from the beginning of our memory, conscious memory, up till now. Right? So really what we are, what intelligence is a space of awareness where a body moves in it and it's recording itself as the whole space of awareness. Okay? So that has to do with in regards to the notion of the soul. Anybody wondering about what the soul is? It's like I'll give you this. There was this event that happened. There was this enlightened yogi on stage, and some guy's like, "Yo, man, what's the soul?" And the guy was like, "Yo, do you know your ego?" And the person was like, "Yeah, I know what the ego is." And the person's like, "Okay, find your ego right now in this moment." Right? And the person's like, "Okay, I found my ego, like this sense of self talking to you." And the person's like, "What's moving that is God." Right? And so it's another way of saying our known belief converts into unknown faith, or faith in the unknown. Okay? That's when a spiritual life is happening. It's pretty much you're getting to experience your unknown self in an unknown world before you actually exit as a known self in a known world. Now, how do you handle the inner realm information influx? I would say you do something external, you write it down, you communicate it, or on some level you watch it, or you instantly just ask the moment why it's happening the way it is. The whole point is that Carl Jung says it best. He says, unless you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and call it fate. And really the point of spiritualism was to wonder why the consciousness was even there to make the unconscious conscious. And the answer is hilarious, because we will realize that we have been space. Like, the soul is not just in the body. The soul is space. Or it's like the person's like, I had an out-of-body experience. Imagine somebody says, I had an out-of-soul experience, like out-of-space experience. That means my intelligence presented itself to itself, not as a phenomenology in space, but as being itself. For you see, the source is the infinite potential. It's like infinity wanted to draw something. To me it's very strange, right? Like it's like there's so much energy in this cosmos that a part of me thinks about, like, so is the purpose of energy to over time become a shape? Is the purpose of evolution to make an object, to turn an object into a subject to itself? Like, what's going on with this? What's going on with the human intelligence? It's like as one is more honest with the nature of reality, the unknown variables increase. Eventually, the unknown variables increase to a point where they reach the personal. On a personal level, like, this is really what mysticism is, where the person's like, who am I? So if I was to, like, let's say, just do a quick pilot run of this, it would be like me being like, who am I? I'll be like, okay, my eyes are open, I'm just someone existing in the world. Then I ask myself, okay, how do I know who I am? It's like, who is that is aware that I am being in the world? So I realize, okay, I'm being aware as the whole moment, and life is being what's being profound present in my whole moment. Then I wonder about myself, what is aware that I am aware? And eventually I come to a point where there's this unchanging, unknown viewer, and the change is just passing through as thoughts coming and going. So what I'm trying to say is, like, we say, oh, look at that person, he has an imagination, but when you truly go into the inner realms, you actually discover how attention and existence as energy are in some sense being the presence of the unknown, or being present in an unknown way. There's so many mysteries surrounding the human species, and and we're so busy fighting the past rather than pioneering the future. People are so busy correcting the past rather than building new systems. When it comes to, like, if we were you know what it is? Like, we're a species that is endowed with a superior intelligence. We are not only conscious of our death, of that we are mortal creatures, we're not just conscious of values. We don't even have just an incredible ability to have a spectrum of emotions and to personalize these spectrums of emotions to sounds and symbols and names and colors and whatnot. So there's an incredible sophistication. Do you know what it is? Like, honestly, if somebody was like looking at planet Earth, human beings are behaving like aliens on Earth. Like, that's the bizarre thing. Out of all the species on this planet, all the other species, they're just trying to fit in and survive. You know, they're just content with how the jungle is, right? But human beings were like, buddy, I want to build skyscrapers and put my name on it. You know, it's like there was some force, something causing us to shift from meaningless chaos looping to a conscious mortal life. Like, there's an honor to this, right? There's an incredible value. We are like rare events of nature happening for the first time ever in every moment. But the issue is, how do we want to position and place ourselves? What does society need, right? And you know, sometimes I feel the biggest issue with the when it comes to the psychological concept of fragmented psychology is that the individual has forgotten, right, that it is so easy to realize it's all one self. That means there is something like a common denominator link between all the personas that is keeping it. And you know what it is? It's hilariously the soul. It's like asking somebody who has multiple personalities, do each of your personalities have their own soul, or are you being the unknown witness of all the states of your psychological shift? You see, we're not just watching our body change, we're also watching our mind change. But the nature of the mind is the nature of attention, right? It's like, to be honest, we are all surviving so that our experience of mind continues. Right? That means, like, that's the reason people are surviving. I mean, if you think about it, they're like, okay, why do you want to survive? Or it's like, okay, the person's like, why do you want money? It's like, because I want to survive. And then you're like, why do you want to survive? Because I want to continue to exist and experience life. And then you're like, why do you want to experience? Because you realize that's the nature of the mind. It takes in the new, implements it into the past, based in what it has accumulated from the past, and then waits for novelty again. You see, there's a brewing desire in the human species, which I feel the information age ushered in. I think this is really what terrified Marshall McLuhan, but to the advanced communicators of the future, it will be able to be managed. Like, the future generations will manage it. But what it is that it's not just the concept of, it's like, think of it this way. Right now we're a being with one biological body and one natural body and one natural mind. Let's say in the future they find a way to connect like a bunch of people's minds, just like a LAN computer network. We just, let's say, connected, like, I don't know, 4 people's imaginations together. Okay. Something like that, I mean. Okay, so it would be as if the person has, or imagine they connected one person's head to the internet, right? What I'm trying to say is, it's like one natural body, one natural mind, and then it was, in the internet scenario, it would be plus one unnatural mind, or plus, let's say, 3 other natural minds. What I'm trying to say is that as much as we are being biological entities, we are being a space of awareness that is being the information of the whole moment having meaning. Right? So what it is that it's multidimensional. We are like these multidimensional beings that are convinced only dualistically life has meaning. Anyways, guys, thanks for listening. I hope this episode was helpful. And if anybody is experiencing information influx, just imagine, those people who have writer's block. Thanks for listening, guys. Much blessings. Namaste. Share, subscribe, like, comment. And I've decided to ask the viewers a question so they can, what do you call it? They can respond in the comment section. So what is your view on the soul, and is it possible for the soul to remember? So that would be the question for the viewers to fill in the comment section. Thanks for listening, guys. Much blessings and namaste, rise mankind, rise. And ultimately I gotta say this before I end. Ultimately what the soul can remember is its origin. And the origin of the soul is the truth that never went anywhere. It's the truth that never fell. You see, we have kind of like, let's say, processed truths and unprocessed truths, That means it's like the truth of mankind returning to earth from heaven that's like a processed truth, What it is that truth wants to see how true it's an invention. Imagine like an inventor has invented something, and the inventor wants to watch like how its invention performs, right? So whatever comes to the invention, it's like it's a test of its own design. So to be true to ourselves and to go through a moment that is incredible, Thanks for listening, guys. Blessings.